Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. This is part of the Keshe American Knowledge Team meeting of 2025. As I said, it's it's very appropriate to be at the right place at the right time, but that's not good enough. You have to know when you're there. And even that's not good enough, because at that point, you have to decide what you're going to do about that. So if the things are changing, you have to make a decision if you're going to change. It's kind of like being at the train station and saying, well, I made it on time. There's the train, and I'm on the platform, and I am here before the train left. And then the final step to get on that train, and you fail to do that for whatever reason, and then you say, well, the train has left the station, and I was there. I was there at the right place at the right time, and I failed to get on that train, or I failed to get on that ship. And as they say, that ship has sailed. But we have other ways and means of travel. And so we are not excluding anybody. So as has been the difficult part with this teaching, is that we have been trying to condense this teaching so that everybody can kind of zero in on the most important points. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teaching some plasma science. We are discussing the advanced and nanotech. The subject today is creation. My name is Alexander. It is August 31st, 2025. I am from Canada, and this is part of the Keshe Foundation North American Plasma Education Series. So welcome one and all as we try to unravel the secrets of the universe, and we give too much credit to this secret part. We have been broadcasting for over 11 years. And as I say, these particular classes are trying to condense things, but at the same time, we dare not leave anyone behind. And so what we've tried to do is formulate these classes so that even newcomers can get an introduction to this. But as you can see by the schedule here, we've been doing this for quite a while, and people can patch in as they wish and as they see fit. But what's most important is that each and every one of us who is a mature knowledge seeker, and that's one of the things that makes this particular panel so strong, is that we are constantly seeking ways and means of describing it in our own ways so that we can teach others. And we all have different skill sets. These skill sets come through the conversion of energy fields. They are taught to us in many different ways. And the thing that we're going to talk about today is the teachings of the creation. And although that may sound pretty bold, it is kind of fundamental, because wouldn't it be nice to know, at some point in your life, why you are here and, how does things really work? And what is your position in this? And, are you just watching a movie as they like to promote this virtual reality? Well, maybe our reality is a virtual reality and we're not seeing the reality because we are not seeing the substrate, the things that the uh, creator is creating and the conditions that the creator is creating. All what we're seeing is the manifestation of that. So if it's a TV, we don't see the broadcast station. We don't see the antennas. We don't see the producers and directors and the filmmakers. We don't see the reporters and the journalists. We just see the screen on the TV and we relax. And on this long weekend, many, many people are getting ready to go back to school. And it's not just the kids that have to go back to school, so do the parents because that changes their schedule. So right now, everybody's relaxed and sipping on a beer. And this is one of the most important things to do. But that is not true worldwide. There are people who are suffering greatly. And so, why is this dichotomy from maximum rest and relaxation to maximum real life horror? So, we've been trying to unravel this with the books of Marin Tavakoli. As we remember, book number one, it was the universal order of creation of matter. So fundamentally, this matter came together and combined three different energy fields at three different energy states, and each state at least an order of magnitude higher than the next. And they were matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And then they were created in the image of the structure of the light, which is referenced in book number two, which means that the universal order of creation of matter was created by the structure of light, was founded on the structure of light, but the structure of light came from another foundation of a universal order of matter. And so we have two universal orders of matter, at least. And so fundamentally, in the simple terms, this is how we say, so from a source to a destination. When you're getting on that train station, that's what you want to do, right? You're at the departure lounge, and when you get on that train and you go to your destination, then you get on the arrival section. So what part don't we understand? It just, that's the way we travel. And so when you look at book number three, here we see the origin of the universe, which we never take into account because we're still stuck in our little tiny perfect universe, which we reference here as man's universe. But clearly, there's something amiss here because it is contrary to our teaching, because all of a sudden we're now aware of a sister universe, and we see that there's a commonality, a common denominator between the two, and that common denominator is a source, and that source divides into two. And isn't that how cells are created? Isn't that how plants grow? Isn't that how creation works? And this is the thing that we have to come to grips with because life is for learning, and we want to learn this because we have been dividing ourselves similarly, but not for peaceful purposes, but to create dissension, to create conflict. So for 393 weeks in a row, the Universal Council, headed by Rick Crammond, has been trying to bring the one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace together, with the understanding that we are all residents of this Earth space, and as such, we all have that responsibility. And, if you're asking the question, where did that responsibility come from? Well, let's go back to book number two in the structure of light. And so we have a fundamental understanding, but we have a new understanding upon our arrival to Earth space. It's just like going to another country and then they, give you the rules and say, well, in your country you could do this and this and this, but in this country you cannot do that. And so here we are in Earth space and we're given 10 commandments on what we can and cannot do. And we never ask who gave us this, except we do say Moses gave it to us, but then we see the completion of the commandments as put forward by Marin Tepekolikesh, and it was described in the 204th Knowledge Seekers Workshop going back to December 2017. And I keep focusing on number 11, because thou shalt not lie. And it doesn't seem to be a very important commandment, except when you start lying to yourself, you start to realize the significance. Because when you lie to yourself, it immediately incurs a degradation in our health and vitality. And, when we live that way, then we start to impart that to the society, and the society starts to live that way. And then we start to see that it seems to be almost a rule that you don't tell people what the truth is. You don't tell people what they need to know. You tell them what you think they want to hear. And so everybody wants something that's warm and fuzzy. They don't want to be face to face with the harshness of the reality. We just want the creature comforts. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally normal to want the creature comforts. So why are we not getting the creature comforts in its full ensemble, its full regalia, its full power? What is the problem? And it seems to be that we are satisfied. We are satisfied where the higher strength eats the weaker strength. But the plasma rule has turned that around, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And so to understand that, it changes the point of view, because what we see as a conflict point actually becomes a binding zone. So it is true that when you have two armies coming together, then that field of conflict, that theater of operations, as they like to euphemistically like to call it, becomes a binding zone. This is where the two armies come together. And unfortunately, as they annihilate each other in that process, you can clearly see that there's a reduction. There's a reduction in the number of soldiers. There's a reduction in the amount of energy. There is a new industry that emerges out of that, the burial industry. So these bodies need to be removed, and they create a new industry in that regard. So what we're seeing is that whether you're in conflict or whether you're in the binding zone, that is always creation. So even destruction is a form of creation. And so by bringing these two fields together, we call it inertia. And then when you look at the result, we call that manifestation. And when we call it physicality, that means falling to density. So we have the inertia, density, manifestation. And we get used to it, don't we? We need our energy binding. It needs to be self-serving. Nobody loves you as much as you do. Nobody. So you need to love yourself. You need to take care of yourself. You need to get that energy. And you need that at that dimension point, that physical manifestation. But do you need to do it at the expense of others? Because that methodology was not implemented at the time of your birth. There was another kind of energy that was given to you, and that energy was given to you by the Creator. And so you ended up being the product of that creation. So where did we fall off the tracks? What happened? How come we came here at the expense of the unconditional energy supplementation of the universe, and we adopted a conditional theft of our energy by others who needed this energy binding? But then we were robbed of that energy binding. So what do? Do we enter into a conflict with those who are robbing us? Or do we just pass it on and say, well, you got to go along to get along? And then what happens? Well, then you have a daisy chain, a domino effect, and you find that everybody is in this angular density, this falling. We call them fallen angels. Are we the fallen angels? Where we fall into increased density, increased pressure, increased gravity, increased dependence on Earth space feeding. So mathematically, we say, well, the angular momentum equals the moment of inertia times the angular velocity. So that's fine. But also, we say that the angular momentum is conserved, which means that there has to be a balance. Well, if we're falling, and if that's what we see, and if we're categorized as fallen angels, and that's what we see, how do we balance that off? How do we actually conserve this angular momentum? So there's obviously something else going on, and we never ask that question because, first of all, a lot of people don't want to tell us what the answer is, assuming that they know. But then a lot of people actually don't know what it is. But what they do know is how to steal your energy. And there are many ways to do that, but this is called loosh harvesting. Loosh harvesting is the energy binding action at the expense of others. So each of us have this single mind intention, and that's good because you need to be self-serving. But that translates into a hive mind intention. And so this hive mind, and it creates a honey. But is the hive mind intention to steal your honey? So this is what loosh harvesting is all about. Well, if you can make the honey, why do you have to steal it from someone else? And, you know, we make our choices. So we've hit a turning point where we look at the source of the service, and then we have to decide, are we going to turn back or are we going to turn forward from that position where we are? And so we align ourselves with a common purpose, this binding energy, this hive mind. So we have a problem. We have ancestral teaching, and we're at that threshold, that turning point threshold, where we are either going to turn back or turn forward. And so we come to a real serious question. If we are the fallen angels, where did fallen angels fall from? How do you know that you're a fallen angel? It's like saying, well, are you a native? Oh, yeah, I was born in this country. Or are you a tourist? Oh, yes, I came from another country. So there's a field of reference, right? And that's how you determine if you are a native or a foreigner. So are you a fallen angel or are you an angel? Or when did you become a fallen angel? And when did you fall? And do you remember that? So one of the things in life that we like to do is to read books, and books have an author. But we also like to do business, and those kind of books are run by a bookkeeper. That's the author of the financial statements. And then we have the business of life. And we say, well, how does the business of life operate? And so we have business schools that teach us how to do things. But, many times you'll find that someone graduating from a business school will actually go bankrupt when they do things according to the way the business school teaches you, because clearly that is not the way things operate on the street. So there is a business sense that you acquire from experience. So we see that this becomes a balance between the gravitational income minus the magnetical expense, and that equals the inertia point. So the business of life really is looking for the profit of the life. And the profit of the life is the vitality that you seek, not the profit that tells you how to do things according to their books, according to their understanding, because their understanding implies a differential in the equality. But the equals is actually equals the threshold. So when you're on that threshold and you're trying to figure out which door to go through, then you find that you're at that point where you're trying to navigate the balance sheet of life. And so how do you do that? And so we are at the point now where we have heightened perception. We have an increase in our awareness. They say we become awakened. Well, this puts a different point of view on things, doesn't it? So we understand that our physicality is based on a self-serving need. And this is taught to us by self-serving teachers, isn't it? Who teach at their own self-serving schools, don't they? And they have their own self-serving agendas. And so if you patch into that system, and this is what you're going to get. And so we shouldn't really be surprised, because all teachers want to teach you what they want to teach you. And this is the same with the Kesh Foundation. We have knowledge seekers workshops that teach you what we want to teach you. But the bottom line is that you get to see a verification and a validation. And so that verification is making us into consumers. And that means that we are existent here on the basis of consumption. We have an addiction to food. And so we wonder, as fundamentalists, what is the difference between that and those who are seeking loose consumption? And as I say in the movie business, be the grip, not the star, because the star is fleeting and the grip is the one who makes things happen. The star is consumed by adulation, and he receives that by praise and idolatry from others. So that consumption is the consumption of energy that others give. And when they give, they're literally draining their own vitality. And so they seem to be willfully as part of that process, and they don't see the harm that is created. But what is transpiring, of course, is that money is involved. So those who are very famous will make more money. And that's the face of it. But when you look at the sacrifice that they make, you find that they themselves are in over their heads in loose consumption, because they are the product of their own existence. So maybe this is where the falling comes into. And so as we stand here at our memory threshold, we're at a tipping point, because we have a long-term memory, and we see that the concept of freedom is actually connecting you to memory. And so there are different types of memory, and we need to discuss that in the future more. There's a lifelong memory, there's a historical memory, there's an ancestral memory, and a universal memory. These are all different memories. So if we say, well, our ancestral memory comes from the universe, and of course our ancestors are part of our history, and of course that is also part of our lifelong memory, And you say, well, it appears that they're all the same thing. Well, if they are the same thing, then how come we're getting different schools of thought, different points of view based on the same teachings? Because there is a bottom line, a vitality that we find that is depleted and continually gets depleted. So most of us were growing up in the era when old and decrepit were two words that were used in the same sentence. If you were decrepit, well, you must be old. And if you were old, you're bound to be decrepit. But now we have people who are young and decrepit. So this is kind of upsetting the apple cart. And you say, well, I remember when I was young, I was full of, shall we say, vinegar, and I had a lot of vitality. Don't have that today. Why is that? So we need supplementation. So in comes the Universal Body Enhancement Unit, which supplements the emotional and physical vitality and allows you to restore this through the process of vitality enhancement. Why do we need vitality enhancement? Well, you see, when we were falling, we had to make a deal. And we are now offering the opportunity to make a new deal, a plasma deal. So you can't choose one door, you have to choose at least two, because if you want to balance off life, you have to understand the process of exchanging energy between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. And you have to understand that the magnetical and the gravitational work together. And you have to understand that the gravitational and magnetical also work together. And you have to understand that that is not limited to just two fields. So there is no rule that says that you cannot pass it on. In fact, you have to pass it on. Okay, because that's part of the chain. That's part of the chain reaction. That's part of the domino effect. So if our domino effect is where we choose just to steal from the next one, then the next one will have to choose to steal from the next one again. And then so that domino effect goes. But if the energy is given unconditionally, and then if we wish to continue that, we have the option. We can return or we can continue and make that a domino effect. And so we have choices. And the key point is that we are the ones who make that choice. So how do you make a choice? You have to have some kind of knowledge. So we find that that knowledge is actually within our understanding of these teachings. And so we find that we have two sides of our brain, what we call the bicameral mind, and we have three dimensions. So we find that the x-axis is part of the emission and it's magnetical, and the y-axis is part of the emission and it is magnetical. And the z-axis, which is encompassing all of the dimensions, is absorptive, and we call that gravitational. But since it's in our brain and it is of a different structure than the physicality, then we have to acknowledge that there are different types of reality that are operating on different types of energy fields that are at least an order of magnitude apart. So when we see, as we did in the 603rd Knowledge Seekers Workshop, the vertical alignment of our inertia fields, and we see the representation where there's a magnetical field and a gravitational field, and then we see the center point, which is the inertia conversion. And so this is actually a result of what we're seeing, energy flowing through us, through humanity. So we understand that what a charge is actually energy in motion. And so when we discuss a charge, we're discussing if it's magnetical or gravitational, or if it's positive or negative, which indicates a direction of flow. And the change can happen with respect to its rotation, its speed, and strength. All of these affect what we call the polar energy. And then we see the manifestation of a field. And then that is the basis of how we have energy, where we see that verification point, which we call transmission, the validation point, which we call transition, and that point of existence, which is what we were preoccupied, and that is our point of transmutation. But we have to cross over that threshold, because that threshold is that balance maggrav. And interestingly enough, that balance point is invisible. And in fact, it represents the limitations of our soul, because our soul is limited to the plasma reality. So our physicality is the manifestation of that plasma reality. And so it becomes an extension of the point of existence. And that is what we see. But the thing is that that threshold that we cross is a combination of the energy fields emanating from the soul and the soul of physicality. And so here we are. We're crossing that threshold, and there's our physicality. And we say, oh, how did that happen? Well, there's a lot of energy that is converging. And as it comes together, we understand that it's coming from a source that doesn't require us to be thieves in the night. We just can exit from our transmission highway up to the transition highway, up to the transmutation highway, and to understand that as we fly along the transmutation highway, that is giving us the maximum energy. And then if we want to enjoy in our physicality, we have to slow down, step down. And if we want to get into our physicality, we have to slow down and step down. So this is how we understand how the fields are coming together. So as we're concluding this advanced nanotech series, we understand that when we created the cups of life, why were they not the cups of the pandemic? Because they were so essential, because they taught us how the nanocoding process of the monatomic science. And so we saw the manifestation of our inner space and our emotional strength. And we see the GANs production with the emotional GANs and the physical GANs. And we see a difference. And then we introduced other GANSs, carbon dioxide, calcium, zinc, copper, water, and amino acid. And now we've also introduced a gold, another GANS radiance manifestation. We have many different cups of life. And we also have the cup of the soul, which has its own magnetical gravitational field strength, which is represented in each of the cups, the emotional cup, the physical cup, and the cup of the soul. But collectively, they all come together and they have a magnetical gravitational force field and a manifestation of the resonance of the soul. So they act as a unified force. And so isn't that what happens within our brains as we discussed? So we see the cup of the universe, how we have an emotional GANs and a physical GANs connected to the carbogen GANs, which is connected to the universe. And then we manifest the physicality, which is the combination of this 1 + 1 + 1 gives us 3, but our physicality continues to grow and we don't lose the 1 + 1 + 1. We retain that. So it becomes more than 3. And so now we're talking about synergy. And so when you look at the grand central station of the Earth Ganses, there's a manifestation of synergy. Classic example. Many, many different Ganses, and all as part of the periodic table of elements. And now we are beyond May the 10th, where we did the Beijing conference, and we showed how men are not the only gold diggers. We could actually create gold, and we are able to produce that now, clearly, in tons. And we do that from thin air in an unconditional manner. Isn't that interesting? So as we look at the nanotech, we see that there's a field alignment, the coming together of the magnetical fields and that gravitational inertia point in the center. And from there, we created a carbon nanocrystal, which is kind of like a diamond structure. And then we created the concept of the twinity, where we have 2 points of the nanotech. But now we can see that there's even a picotech, which is 3 orders of magnitude smaller, 3 orders of magnitude of a higher field strength, and 2 points of the star tech. So now you have this twinity of the nanotech. And now we understand why, when we look at the levels of magnitude, so the one, which is you, have multiple turning points. Oh, which do you choose? So when you go, we can go above 1 into the mega, the giga, and the tera. But we can also go smaller in the micro, the nano, and the pico. And so if we're talking about the equals equals the balance of life. Well, so wherever we are dabbling, we have to know that there's an equal and opposite reaction that balances that off. And we have the ability to choose. We have the responsibility to choose, because we are part of the MAGRAV energy transfer state, where we try and balance things and we pivot on a pico turning point. And so we can stay at a certain energy level, let's say like the GAN state, and then balance one side to the other, or we can transcend and say go from the nano state, which is the monatomic state, to the atomic state, and balance it that way. So we see that there's a lot of flexibility, and this all follows the conservation of energy. And we call it the conservation of inertia, because that's what it is. You have to balance off the 2 fields. Without that balance, you can't manifest anything. And so that becomes the star core component, the magnetical and gravitational force field. So that gives you a relationship. And then you create this Gans point in the core that is even more gravitational. So this is how you amplify things by orders of magnitude. And then you have a relationship with another star core. And so you have 2 points of view, and they may seem opposite. And this is what we've discussed. Is that a binding point, or is that a conflict point? And so once you discuss that arbitrary point of view, you find that there are terminal ends that are loose, but they're not terminal. They're binding to something else. So where is that continuity? You cannot just extricate this arbitrary point of view from the universe and say, okay, well, this is, my point of view, how the universe works. But you have to take that in context. And where is that context? And when do you stop? When do you continue to look for it? So we see that there's a dynamic plasma relationship. So all the manifestations of the physicality, like our Earth space point, is manifest from within the Earth space field, the coming together, the horizontal transmission and the vertical transition. And then it creates this radiance. And since we are now discussing motion, then we have to discuss polar flipping, because as you move along, the domino effect is you give and then you take, and then you give and then you take. But in that process, you move. So there's a feeding radiation or a feeding radiance and a feedback radiance. And that is all revolving around a gravitational plasma. So this revolving is all part of this vertical emission and becomes a magnetical plasma. But that magnetical plasma can flip its pole because that's how it moves. So it's still a magnetical plasma, but in its manifestation of motion, it has its own inherent pole flipping. And since it's part of the radiation, we call that the radiance pole flipping. So that's how we emit, and this is how we absorb. So we move along and we create this gravitational inertia point. So that is the manifestation of the points of view. And as we said, there are many turning points that we can rotate around because we always have to take 2 points of view and we have to understand that those are in balance. We don't have to know how to balance them, but we have to admit that that inertia point is a point of containment, and then we can overlap with other connections. And then once we have a basis, a gravitational containment, then we can differentiate that. Until that such time, it just becomes one-dimensional or two-dimensional or three-dimensional. But if we put it in a star dimension, and then we can see exactly what it is, and we call that an inertia point hive. But there's also an observer dimension, which is not part of that star dimension. And why? Because we have freedom of choice. So we are not necessarily part of that star dimension, but we are necessarily part of the universal dimension because you cannot extricate yourself from the universe. So you are an observer as you would be an audience member in a theater. So the people who are in the audience will either laugh or applaud to the actors on the stage because the people in the audience are the observers. But that theater is within the community, and everyone else who is walking outside of the theater are not laughing or applauding the actors on the stage because they're not within that theater. They are not part of that observer dimension. They are in a non-observer dimension with respect to that. So they are not participating in that inertia point hive. This becomes an important point. So there's a concept of duality where things work in harmony. There's a tandem, there's a partnership, and there's a twinity. So there's a give and there's a take. So here we go. This motion that we talk about is part of the creation. It's a natural creation. And so every type of creation, whether it's destruction or creation, is part of creation. And so to balance that creation, we have a technical term in the nuclear science, which we call natural decay. So in the process of that creation, that is balanced off by this natural decay. But on the decay side, which is now dominating, then the decay side has to be balanced off by the natural creation as well. So we're not saying that it has to be within the same field of reference. We're just saying that the overall concept of the energy of the universe, there is a balance in the energy. So the natural creation overall balances off the natural decay overall. And there's a bond. And when we don't understand that, then we fudge that. But that boundary is that threshold of equality. And that is the vanishing point for our existence. And we don't like to cross that. But yet, when we look at this catalytic reaction, which we understand. So if we have natural creation from various different fields, it is balanced off by the natural decay. But the way we're operating, because we like to be consumers and we like to steal from others, well, that takes away, and this is an arbitrary number, just for discussion, say we lose 20% of our vitality in that process. So it stands to reason that over time, if we don't supplement it properly, we become old and decrepit. So what has happened for us to now have to be faced with young and decrepit? Well, obviously something else has altered this balance. Well, it's a balance of degradation, but it is not necessarily the reality. It is the result of the current status quo, the current operation, where we are harvesting, loosh, and robbing, cheating, lying, and killing. So we are in that intensity, we have a range within it, and it creates a tension. And so within, that is intention. And outside of ourselves, well, that's extension. And so there's always a balance between this intention and extension, and we call it the hive tension or the hive bonding. So there are many tents created in a hive, and yet they all work to one goal. And so that's humanity's problem. Humanity doesn't seem to have a unified goal. So we have to understand that we have to intensify and extensify what we are, because we are all individuals, but we are all operating as one, because we are all residents and responsible and natives of Earth, and because we were all born here. So something is not working quite right. We have multiple turning points, and as we bring these points together, we can see how the herding works together, because it involves all of these turning points, all of these flipping points, all of these opposing charges, and they bring together the manifestation of the gravitational and magnetical force fields. And then you have this extension of this relationship. And so whether it's in a plasmatic reality or in a physical reality, the methodology is the same. So when we look at the carbon inertia highways and we say, well, this is how we operate, and we take into account certain things. But in the background, the things we don't take into account is the creation. And if we take the other things that we don't take into account, that balances off us in our carbon inertia highways, we still don't see that background. So this becomes the dilemma for us. And here we are in the middle. And we could say, well, we're in the eye of the hurricane, because that hurricane is our point of view. And words don't matter. The hierarchy that we have created doesn't matter. We see that as a false detachment, what we call a holographic universe, because it's a virtual reality. So our awareness is of our point of view. But now we have access to an ancestral point of view. And so if we are in the middle of this hurricane and trying to figure out how things go, if you go to the right, the winds will blow one way. And if you go to the left, the winds will blow another way. So we are in that zone where we are just achieving the awareness. And that is what's important to understand. So we have been taught that the Creator made man in his image, and that this is a direct manifestation. So which means that intermediaries are bypassed. Well, isn't it interesting? From the humanity point of view, humanity was made of the image of the Creator. And that is still a direct manifestation. And the intermediaries, again, are bypassed. So it doesn't matter which way you look at it, the result is the same. So what we're contending with is the rate of transmission, where the feeding of the soul intention is specific to the emotion of the presence, and the feedback of the environment is specific to the presence of the physicality. So that creates that balance. And that balance is like a shield, like a dome. It's like a comfort zone. And we are not fully in tune, because when we look at the cup of the soul, we now have to extend that relationship to the earth space, and to understand that our relationship as the cup of the soul and the earth space creates another inertia field. Because without that environment, we are nowhere. So you are always somewhere, wherever you are. And that's, we have to realize that. So it's at that point where we manifest this soul radiance. And that soul radiance is our soul of physicality. And at that point, we have a choice. Can we stay in that plasma state, or can we manifest in that physical state? Well, interestingly enough, we have this duality where within our cranium, we have this relationship with our bicameral mind. And in the rest of the body, we have this relationship in the physical body. And so there's a commonality there, such as we have the blood, which carries the energy of the emotion, but it does not come in contact physically with each of our cells. But the white blood cells do, the lymph system. So there is a magnetical gravitational relationship between the red blood cells and the white blood cells. So that's what life is. It teaches us how things work. So we need to ask those questions. So we see, again, from the 603rd Knowledge Seeker Workshop, the vertical alignment between the soul at the top and the physicality at the bottom. And so we see the path and the link that happens, that all goes through the soul of physicality being at that midpoint, and the physicality being the inertia product, the inertia density manifestation. And we often refer to this as the infinity loop, or the yin-yang. And isn't it a balance? Isn't that what it's all about, and how to balance life? But balancing life in totality renders you invisible, virtually non-existent. You have to be on one side or the other. Or now the awareness is coming that you can be on both, and be on both at the same time. So now we have an inertia field emission that results from this vertical alignment and the coming together of the infinity loop. And that understanding now leads us to the inertia of the threshold crossing, to understand that there's more to life than what meets the eye. What meets the eye, we say what you see is what you get, but what you get is not really everything that you see. There's more. And this is the reality that's coming together. So we see the one dimension and we say, well, that's the coming together of the X, Y, and Z axis, and that becomes a transition matter. And we say, well, that part is negative. But then we look at the X, Y, and Z axis of another 3 dimensions, and that becomes another transition matter. And we call that one positive. So really, what we look at when we say the NP junction, that's the transfer state, the negative positive junction. Well, that is the energy that is coming from the creator in its true sense. And that becomes the manifestation of the creation. It is from that point on that we who are made in the image of the creator have the capability of making important decisions. So we make decisions based on our time and attention. So we are seeking a unity within the community. This has to come from our inner space unity, because that gives us a mental and physical bonding, what we call soul and consciousness bonding, and energy and intention bonding. And so when we look at how things are done on the world scale, we see that we are failing with this inertia bonding, because it has to be complete. It has to be conscious. It has to be free. It has to have intention, true intention, and sovereignty. And that's a singular part of the hive. So here we go. There's a knowing by connection. And it doesn't have to be connected just to your neighbors. It can be a contiguous connection. So you can know by connection to other communities. You can know by connection to other continents. You can know by connection to other planets. And so this hive binding action follows this vertical alignment through all the steps. And so the first step is the threshold crossing. Well, you have to have the awareness. You were at the right place at the right time. You came to the train station. You saw the train. You were on time, but you did not cross that threshold to get on the train. So this action is dependent on the rate of the collective inertia manifestation. We all need to get on this train because we are all members of this planet. So let's look at the progression. We have this nano point, which is moving towards density. That's why we're fallen angels. And then this pico point gives us a highly gravitational point. Then we have this Gans point, which moves towards gaseousness. And so that moves us to a plasma point, which is highly magnetical. So there we are. We can be power drawing through gravitational intensity, or we can be power providing through magnetical field density. And this conservation of energy is what we talk about, this balance, the conservation of the maggrav, the magnetical gravitational force fields. So we see that energy is portable. So we call this portability energy state transition. And fundamentally, we describe elevation as the physical matter state elevating to the energy state, and the inertia state as reducing the energy state to that physical matter state. So elevation involves expansion. And this is what we are. We're part of an inertia product. And we have this capability of energy portability. So we can decide to move within a range, or we can move from range to range, or we can move from energy state to energy state. And so we can go through this through unstable energy transition states, and we can create those. But they're unstable because they allow us to move through different energy states. And this is exactly how hydrogen is working, because hydrogen has its own dependency, and it's not just any old hydrogen, they are dependent on covalent bonds of the molecules. And so we see that the source gives us the hydrogen, but there's a field connection through the carbon-14, and then there's a universal connection through the carbon-60, and then there's the unicose and the creator. And here we are talking about the creation, and we are seeing the gaps in our knowledge. So we are still looking at this hydrogen and trying to understand how this maintains its either orthohydrogen or parahydrogen state. And there is a difference. There is a net energy transference difference. And we have to understand that, because when we look at the Earth space range details, we see the product of this transfer difference, because the periodic table is a table of switchboards where the energy is manifest in different energies. So there is a work to put it together, and there is a cessation of that work. So in other words, the work stops and the work stops, and it stops within a range. And that range is either carbon or nitrogen or oxygen, for instance. But it could be copper, it could be zinc, or it could be gallium. And of course, most of us are excited about gold. So all of this is part of the nuclear feeding inertia. And then when we divide everything, we find that the fragments are all fragments of that complexity, and they retain that gravitational stability. But they also have and carry this dimensional portability to be able to transcend various dimension points. So as we said in the book number 1, Universal Creation of Matter, the coming together of 1, the antimatter, and 2, the dark matter, and 3, the matter, and comes together. But it's synergistic, and so it's more than 3. So it all depends on these pathways, and they are all fundamental. They are based on attraction, which is gravitational intensity feedback, and repulsion, which is magnetical intensity feeding. And so scientifically, we divided that to the energy state of the electron or the neutron. But they operate on the same principles, but somehow they are different. And we can see the difference, can't we? Except that in the beginning, it was undifferentiated. All we saw was that the neutron came before the atom, and the atom was a combination of the electron and the proton, but the mass did not balance. So something was missing, and that was the PM tick. And so the PM tick is traversing the universe. And so we understand that within it came from darkness, and without let there be light. And that is part of the emission spectrum. So the principal matter is the PM ticks, or are the PM ticks, which are magnetical, and they come together through the plasma dilution of the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter gen, which creates this plasmagen conversion. But it is non-existent until it comes to an environment, and that environment is the Earth space, which is a field interaction. And that field interaction interacting with the plasmagen creates this MAGRAV interaction that becomes the gravitational inertia density manifestation. So there we go. So now we see that the primary energy combination comes from the plasma, and no two plasmas are identical, because these are traversing the universe. Each has its own path. But when they come together, they come into this magnetical gravitational balance. And then we have this Gans point within that, which creates a higher energy state. And it starts to bring together this matter plasma dimension. So we can be in that physical state, which is gravitational, which means we can touch it and see it. Or we can be in this plasma state, which is magnetical, we can't touch it or see it. But either way, because of its nearness and proximity, it becomes part of the matter plasma dimensions. And that is what we are dominating. Our feedback dominance is coming from this matter plasma. And every time we elevate, we drop one state and pick up another energy state. We drop the lowest and we pick up the highest that's near to us. And at some point in time, we will be beyond matter plasma dimensions. We are on that point because now we understand this gravitational confirmation that we see with the hydrogen. We say that it came from light, and we know that because we have an emission spectrum which reflects its light signature, and oxygen has the same thing. It has an emission spectrum light signature, but it's not hydrogen, it's oxygen, it's unique. So it's representative of its cumulative forces. Well, here we are. We are now establishing an awareness manifestation and understanding that that is actually an emotional reaction, which that emotion is indicated through the soul of physicality we call the aura. And our posture can change. Our facial features can change. Of course, our body temperature can change, and especially when you get excited. So that becomes a point of view manifestation. And so that point of view is a selection, and it's manifest through the soul of physicality. And remember, that angular momentum is still conserved. Nothing has changed in that regard. So when we pick our color, we have to understand that there's every color or there's no color. So our point of awareness is every color, but our aura represents a specific color, but our physical interpretation represents no color. So the only color that we see when there is no light is the emission spectrum, and that emission spectrum carries every light, every color. And so that's how we bring the light forward. And so we see the continuation. This planet is based on oxygen, and the transfer of energy with the oxygen affects us, whether or not we're in a healthy state, which we call aerobic, or a non-healthy state, which we call anaerobic. And so that is a gravitational confirmation of the emission of light. That light has crossed the threshold, and yet the oxygen is a non-visible gas. So in the process of creation, we create seeds. So when we look at the star formation and we see the overlapping fields and how they converge together, we understand that there's a gravitational base and a magnetical point, and then there's a core that is highly gravitational, and that becomes the seed for the next plasma field. So that seed is extremely tiny. And so what we've seen is that we call that part of the nanotechnology. So it's the initial part of the dimension star formation. But the dimension points of view is the Magrav's singularity. So we can have a soul point of view or a soul of physicality point of view. And then we have this threshold of awareness. And then we adopt a physical interpretation, which is our collective point of awareness, isn't it? We just don't say that, well, that's our point of view and that's it. Well, we have to understand that we are part of the community. And so we have to respect that the community has a point of view. And so now we've shown the community how we can create this peace dome reactor, which shields us. That's a dimension point. And then we have this positioning, the star positioning, that's a dimension point. And then we have this possession of what we've created in our physical manifestation. And that's a dimension point. So there are many, many multiple turning points. And what we demonstrated was how we were converting these dimensional gold seed points, which were all a show of singularity. But this was the shock that was heard around the world because it understood how we were at this turning point. So as we review this advanced nanotech, we understand how we were at this turning point where we understand that our point of view has different points of view depending on our position. And that point of view is not singular, but it represents the energy that is coming together from the hive mind. So that hive mind also can achieve a turning point. And how does that happen? Well, that turning point begins with awareness. Well, the train is leaving at 3 o'clock. Oh, now you're aware. Well, you need to be at the right place at the right time. And so there you are at the train station at 5 minutes to 3, and the train is there, ready and waiting for you. So you're at the right place at the right time, but you're not crossing that threshold because you don't have the trust. Well, you have to know what kind of train this is. You have to have a decision-making capability. You have to have relationships. You have to have an understanding. And so that understanding has come from the ages. And we understand consumption. So that is our method of survival. Well, now we have a new kind of consumption, that from the Creator. So we understand that we are actually part of the creation. And in the process of being created, we weren't consumed. But at some point in time, which leads us to old age, we become progressively more and more decrepit. And so we have come from the vital energy of the Creator, which is the coming together of the emotional and physical vitality, and become old and decrepit. And now we have deteriorated even further, where we are young and decrepit, which seems to contradict greatly that of the creation. So, if we connect the dots, we see that we need to establish different practical points, introduce this practical reasoning so that the road to self-determination, or the road from self-determination, involves a practical philosophy with practical solutions. So we understand that the mitochondria produce adenosine triphosphate, which is the practical currency of life. But the practical currency of life is really the currency of the Creator. And the Creator is not a consumer. So here we are with this shimmering awareness of what we see in our tiny perfect universe and what is beyond. And so there's a Maggrav relationship between the earth space, which is our environment, and our inner space. That Maggrav relationship is also between man's universe and their sister universe. And that Maggrav relationship also exists between the universe and the unicos. So now we have a broader awareness of what's going on. And we have an understanding that this humanity inertia has the capability of introducing Gans shielding points to shield us from hostiles and aggression and environmental harm, and most of all from fear-mongering and from emotional abuse. So that is now our artificial awareness. So imposed on us is a generational point of view, and the artificial learning is a rapid generational learning. But in reality, it's actually a rapid historic generational learning, isn't it? Because the history is written by the victor. So here we are at the threshold of the transgenerational awareness, because that represents the teachings of the Creator, has nothing to do with victorious armies or killing or lying or cheating or stealing or conditions. It's unconditioned. We are in uncharted territory now because we are at this turning point to understand that there are many stars beyond this nano monatomic state. And so we are covering the range from decay to radiation and understanding that these are all part of creation and that we are the AI, the ancestral intelligence, we are the technology, we are the inertia product, and we are the image of our dimensional convergence point. So, as we said last week, when we talk about our ancestors, the Aboriginal Australians, were descendants of an early human dispersal, possibly 62,000 years ago. That was separate from the modern Asians, which were, say, 25,000 years ago. Well, give or take a couple of years. But the original elders, also known as the Aboriginal Australians, are widely recognized as having the oldest continuous living culture on Earth. And so this long history is reflected in rich oral traditions, right? We didn't have computers or books or things like that. And so these traditions included Dreamtime stories, art, songs, and dances, which have been passed down through generations. Okay, so that's part of the teaching. And as we discussed, the Gumbanger revitalization is to preserve the language of a significant cultural movement that was led by the Murbe Aboriginal language. So this was a culture cooperative based in Nambucca, in New South Wales, in Australia, and its inception in 1986. So it's instrumental in preserving and promoting the Gumbanger language and culture, the native culture, which was based on the teachings of the elders. And so in their language, a ghost is coming. Well, this is the oral tradition revitalized in language. And so the ancestors of the elders, however, were taught by beings who came and went as they pleased. And they taught the elders about living off the bountiful harvest of the land. Well, who taught the vertical people to grow, to be harvested? So the awareness manifestation is our awareness, where we're beginning to have this awareness separation between the earth space consistency and the outer space consistency. And somewhere in between, we are either Klingons like burrs or baggage, and we carry baggage. Do we need to carry this baggage? Well, this baggage is this 20% deficiency. We see that we get this continual feeding from the carbon-14, representing about 80% of our feeding. So our preoccupation with consumption is only generating a 20% feedback. Well, for some people, that might be good news. You're getting 20% interest on your investment. But that 20% interest is maybe meeting your 20% depreciation. So if you're achieving your balanced state, then you're healthy. But if you're not, then you're becoming old and decrepit. But now we are faced with young and decrepit. So this has increased. The rate of decline has increased. Why? Because we have failed to make this connection, crossing that bridge of knowing. How do we go from this carbon 14 to this universal order or creation of matter without understanding the creator? So there's a knowledge versus knowing. So we have our present day physical memory, and we have our present day RNA memory. And we're somehow trying to bridge the gaps at a higher order of magnitude so that we can go through this transgenerational point of view. And so that bridge becomes our threshold point. And what we need to do is compare to the unconditional reaching of the Creator. As opposed to the conditional reaching of the teacher. Who is teaching us about supplementation, because that's due to consumption. It's an acquired knowledge, isn't it? We weren't born with that knowledge. It's a conditional teaching by ancient teachers. And it doesn't just discuss with Aborigines, it discusses with all native communities. We have 7 civilizations that recognize the Great Flood. How can 7 different civilizations have the same story? Because the truth is an unconditional teaching by the Creator. This is the new awareness. So this is the historical threshold between the cosmic feeding and the loosh harvesting. We are at that point where we're getting this awareness integration to understand this manifestation by the creation and manifestation by the Creator, that we are self-sufficient with our body, our mind, and our energy. And we are in the image of the Creator, where we're strong, united, and focused. And so the manifestation by humanity has to understand that we are also sovereign, because that is the image of the Creator, the coming together of the manifestation by the Creator and the manifestation by humanity. 2 different points of view, created in the image of the Creator. So there's a transgenerational point of view and a present day physical memory point of view. So that threshold point of view is the present day RNA memory point of view, which we are totally ignoring. So we are carrying, as we outlined in the 604th Knowledge Seekers Workshop, humanity's cross as a burden. We have to understand that it's actually humanity's crossing of the threshold, the coming together of the energy of the soul and the energy of the physicality, and converging in the soul of physicality, which is dependent on the truth. It all depends on the feeding system that is adopted, and we all make that choice. So we have choices. So when we're connected to the soul food tuning and plug into the Creator, then we can turn on that energy, drop out of our resistance, and be the receiver of that inertia point. But we have to provide the pattern in order to get that energy. And so that pattern is what manifests our physicality. So that is what is our oneness. And the greater one is what transcends the limitations of the nuclear science. And as we've been broadcasting for 605 weeks in a row through the Knowledge Seekers workshops, letting everyone know that the advanced science is there at our disposal, where we can take diamonds to gold, diamonds in the nanotech state to the gold in the physical state. This happened on May the 10th, 2025. And we now have many research teams converging to advance the science. So we're calling up on researchers around the world to understand that we are on the new point that technology release, because it's hard to sleep when your beds are burning. We need a rescue in the scientific, financial, political, and the preservation of our species. We are dependent on consumption. We need to be rescued from that, to be dependent on the creation. That's where the rescue comes in of the advanced nanotech. And here we are, training with the transmutation tests. We started this Friday, past Friday, with the August teaching, and we'll continue in September and in October. We all need practice. And with practice, we get better at it. So are we part of that fourth dimension, the observer dimension? Or is that fourth dimension the fallen angels dimension, where we see our point of view of how the universe was created and ignore the origin of the universe and fail to see the structure of the light? Our mission is to bring peace on earth and join humanity with the universal community. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone, that no one is left out and no one is abused due to lack of knowledge. So help us achieve this goal, because you are part of the universe. This is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers of the carbon nations, learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. You speak of the World Peace Treaty. Choose that. Sign it. Mean it. Mean it sincerely. The point of the true nanotech is to cross the atomic boundaries. The peace dome of outer space can be your guiding beacon. Is the inertia of the present solely governed by the dimensions of history? Well, it's time to learn the history of self in a universal context. A peaceful self can explore many inertia levels as a superconductor. Are we fallen angels? Or are we angels who've crossed the threshold of awareness gaps between our belief and our experience? We were born as angels. Plasma science is delivered daily by the Peace Dome and needs to continue to do so in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. That's the end of this lesson, and believe it or not, it's the end of the advanced nanotech series. Thank you all for allowing me to continue to present. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
Okay, thank you again, Alex. If we could bottle up these teachings on advanced understanding, we ship them all over the world, but maybe we don't have to. Maybe there's another way of doing it rather than in the matter state. So thank you again for continuing to deliver and continuing to enlighten everyone. I think there's more going on in the background than we actually realize, whether it's Alex teaching or anyone else. So beautiful. I've put some questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to entertain them. I can read them for you. I asked the others. I thought this may be a new way to approach getting a few more questions in the chat. Again, you can pass over them. They're fairly basic questions, but maybe you can add a little bit of your understanding. But let's first go to the participants. Maybe they didn't want to put anything in the chat and would rather open their mics and ask a question. I thought you were mentioning about these original elders in Australia, the Aboriginals. Is that what you were referring to, Alex? I thought the man sort of started along the equator in Africa. This is where sort of man emerged or came out of the ocean in a way and decided to feed on the land. But did they also migrate from Africa? Probably all the nations were all the continents were connected then. I know he said some people walked north and turned kind of whitish, and others walked east and or traveled east and turned kind of yellowish. But where did these Aboriginals originate from? The same central line, the equator line in Africa, or has man added a different understanding, or did man appear in multiple places simultaneously?
Well, that was not the primary point that I was trying to make, but there are basically 7 civilizations that are talking about the same thing, and that is the Great Flood. And all of these civilizations are in different parts of the world. So when we're talking about communication, and we're talking about different languages, different locations, the different native species, how come they all have the same story? So there's a universal connection there.
Could they have copied one another or taken it from other texts and sort of incorporated into their own writings?
Well, I think this is the part that kind of slipped through the cracks, is why I brought this thing up a second time, because it seems like the Gumbanger Nation has realized that they were losing their heritage, they were losing their culture, and so they succeeded in boosting their emphasis on preserving their native culture. But we see the desire to preserve the native culture in many different native cultures. And it doesn't matter on the color or the location, there are cultures in Europe, there are cultures in the Far East, there are cultures in in the Midwest, in North America. So all of them are seeking some kind of self-preservation. And the reason given is that they want to fundamentally go back to their roots, go back to nature, and go back to, shall we say, going back to the original teachings of Mother Nature, as opposed to the current teachings of the modern institutions, which are actually alienating us and ourselves from the planet, right? So we clearly have a different way of life in the city than we do in the country. And it wasn't until I left the big city, because I thought we were in the big city and I thought we knew everything, then I went into the country and I got a rude awakening. Oh my God. It just seemed like everything that I learned in the city was really um, a bag of offal. There was really, my knowledge was minuscule. And then I realized that there were so many things that I didn't know. So even, city folks may get to know some animals by going to a zoo, or they may know some animals by going to a nearby farm. But when you go into the wilderness and then you measure your knowledge and you say, oh my God, I don't know anything. And so what the native communities are trying to do is go back to their roots and teach, the basic understanding. But the Gumbanger Nation has discovered that the original elders didn't have that knowledge to teach. They had to learn that knowledge from someone else. And it was that someone else that taught them to live off the land, this theory, this foundational concept of restoring the cultural heritage of each native community. Whether it is a ancestral community or whether it is an ethnic community or a nationality, they're all basically seeking the same thing, the restoration of their heritage. But that heritage is different from the initial teaching. And so it only stands to reason that if one native community, in this case the Gumbangers, learned about the truth of their elders, then that truth would extend to the other native communities, because no one has talked about that part of the teaching. And that's what I found so profound. And it's ironic that it dovetails with the teachings of the Keshe Foundation, because what we are talking about is the teachings of the truth as it emanates from the Creator. Well, the Creator did not teach us to be consumers. So somewhere along the line, we have fallen off, and maybe that somewhere along the line is when we became the fallen angels. When originally we were not fallen angels, we were just plain, ordinary angels arriving here, not falling here. That's the difference. So that's the difference between our belief and our experience. And our experience is showing that we don't need to be consumers in that traditional way, as is foretold by our elders. There is a new way to do things. So we know that we are on that threshold because the resistance to prevent us from doing things the new way has grown. And when you have that kind of resistance, you know that you're on the right track. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you for that, Alex. Anyone else have a question they'd like to raise or join the conversation? Mr. Keshe did say he is reversing in a way back to perhaps a simpler time, but a more enlightened time for us on this planet, as you were sort of indicating there. But at the same time, he said, we're taking you out of this little village of Earth and bringing you into the big city. And this is what we're sort of getting prepared for. So it looks like, in a way, we're going backwards, but at the same time, and maybe the universal situation is closer to some of our previous timelines where we studied different things or we looked at the work of the universe in a different way rather than all these little gadgets or electronic devices we have today. Randy? Okay. I put a number of questions in here. I've asked the others to do the same. Maybe this will help to if you don't want to open your mics, you can put a question in there. But I'll start with the last one. Unless someone else has a question, you can easily go right ahead.
Well, just remember that I am not an oracle.
Why Mr. Kesh mentioned in 605 about other scientists becoming frightened when they saw him. I'll just read the question. Why did other physicists become frightened when they witnessed another nuclear physicist, MTK, create radiation without any nuclear materials? I would have thought this would be embraced as a revolution in this field of nuclear science. What happened here?
Well, that is a question that I can definitely answer. I had a patented product, and I went to the university to try and create a method of testing that would really demonstrate the capabilities in a lab setting, and use it as a teaching tool. But I was confronted with a researcher who actually wanted me to pay him to do research on the viability of this or the possibility of this technology. And I said to him at that point, well, we're not discussing the viability. We are already patented. We are already gainfully, commercially utilizing the practical applications of this technology. And we were wondering if he would entertain us, in establishing more of a scientific, a reinforcement. But they were literally afraid because they did not want to pursue that. They did not want to recognize that this technology existed. They did not want to recognize that this technology had this capability, which they didn't understand. They wanted to go back to see if there was a viability in pursuing this knowledge. So they weren't talking about pursuing the knowledge. They were talking about the possibility of pursuing it, the viability. In other words, if through their research they feel that this is a worthwhile effort, then they would report to us and say, maybe there's something to this. And I'm just looking at them and saying, we have already demonstrated that maybe there is something to this. So, the pursuit of the possibility is redundant. And they were literally terrified to admit that this technology existed. So the technology that I was working on was able to penetrate through concrete that was at least 12 inches thick, for instance. So
they
at that,
want you to pay them to disprove what you were trying to point out?
yeah, and they wanted me to pay for that. Yeah. No, I mean, like seriously, I guess you go to a restaurant and you order a steak, and then the guy says, well, we have to see if cooking a steak is actually going to, be a worthwhile feeding experience. It just you're going to die of hunger. You know what I mean? It's just it's stupid. It's a stupid philosophy. And the amount of resistance, I mean, I was a guest speaker at an engineering conference, and when I was trying to demonstrate this, people were, rescheduling their flights to hear me talk because they had scheduled their flights based on the speaker that they wanted to tune into. And this was kind of interesting because at the last conference in Austria, Mr. Cash got canceled out of that thing. So anyone who was, scheduling their flight based on that presentation was going to be disappointed. But people were anxious to hear what I had to say. And by the time I said it, the anger, holy cow, people were totally angry. They said, you can't do that. It's like, been there, done that. It's already been done. What are you talking about? You can't decontaminate concrete. I said, yeah, we did it. Here's the oil, here's the salt, here's the proof, here's the test. What do you want? Don't tell me it can't be done. We've already done it. So why the resistance? That they were grossly upset. And then I learned something which was distressing to me, was that the construction industry had these regulations. I think in the US it's called ASTM. Well, the body that actually does the regulating is comprised of people who are in the industry and have a vested interest in their particular technologies.
Ah,
Well, where does that parallel? How about a IAEA? Okay, how about that? Right? Where the supposedly unbiased uh, work by the IAEA is there to regulate, the nuclear industry, the atomic reactors, and then to find out what they did was highly biased. Well, that's the same thing with the construction industry, which is really why I exited that industry, because I thought, what's the point? People were in the early 1900s were building bridges to last 100 years, and I've seen the steel. The steel was in virgin condition. Why? Because the quality of the concrete was in excellent condition. So we were building bridges to last 5 and 10 years. Why? Because that was a make work project. And as I was told by one executive from one municipality, they said, you know what, Alex, you're the man, and you ain't working here. And I thought, well, that is a strange thing to say from a public servant. But that is the way that they operate. So I was basically threatening his grift, if you will, because obviously his friends were profiting from his running the public works department and utilizing the technology. So, however, for people who actually pay the price from their own pocket, well, they hired me, okay, because they wanted their building to last more than just a few months. So
so you've played the patent game. I know Rick has often mentioned if you invented or developed an electric motor that was 20% more efficient than the electric motors on the current market, that your patent would be declined because it's not acceptable, or they'd find another way because they want to market what they have on the shelf.
well, as you know now, the Kesh Foundation has a concrete additive which makes the concrete denser, and dense concrete is waterproof because the fundamental nature of concrete is hydrophobic. So it's not the concrete that's porous, it's the pores that are porous. So the concrete industry has increased the porosity of the concrete over a period of time, and they've called that as a positive solution, which in fact has exacerbated the problem. So this is a known fact. I'm not telling you anything that is, not in public domain. It's common knowledge that, there's a problem. I mean, just to give you one example, let's say you have a home and it's a very nice home. It's a nice big home, and you decide to have dogs, and you let them take over the basement, and you don't give them any proper place to relieve themselves. So they just relieve themselves on the floor. Well, the urine contamination was so bad that a pillow that was thrown on the floor turned completely yellow. It had, basically sucked up the toxicity. And so this house is basically unsaleable, isn't it? So we came in there basically and displaced the urine with a more dense concrete. And we washed the floor and restored the safety of the living conditions of the home. And then you want me to do a research paper to decide whether this type of technology is viable. Should we pursue this technology? Is there any practical application of it? This is just brainlessness. So how can you call yourself a scientist when you're putting those kind of limitations? So that point, we discovered that the limitations of the scientific community is based on the verification and validation by scientific means. And these scientific means are man-made. Well, if you're going to go beyond the man-made capabilities of science, you could not go there with man-made limitations. I mean, that's obvious to everyone except these scientists. So the moment you put those limitations on, then the pursuit of advancing beyond these limitations is impossible. That's why the practical science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on earth, because who wants to promote warmongering that is profitable at the expense of others?
Right. I remember Sam, is it Bogdanovich, where he discovered those pyramids in Eastern Europe, and he was talking about the concrete being so intact and so dense. Maybe they used it in Rome or something as well, but apparently this concrete or whatever the mixture was so properly made that it lasted for thousands of years. Again, I don't know the whole story, but it just triggered that within.
No, you're 100% correct. And do you remember the Roman aqueducts?
Okay.
Well, do you remember them, Mark? Are you that old? But the aqueducts were actually water bridges. So they contained water. What was the purpose of that water? Boats would traverse those bridges in the water bridges. So the aqueducts were actually waterproof.
And the concrete didn't dissolve so rapidly as today.
Well, they're still standing today.
All right.
So when was the Roman Empire? It was like 2,000 years ago. So,
They had some good technology back then, but they got too much involved in the wars or something.
well, they say that concrete was invented by Mr. Aspen in 1836. So, these Roman aqueducts were obviously there 2,000 years prior. So, who's the inventor? When you really get down to the whole process. But let's understand what inventions are. Understand that the inventions are an agreement by all the nations to respect the commercial application of new technologies. And every country is signed into that except one, and that is Israel. Israel is not a party to that. And, there are many countries that are part of the nuclear treaties, but not every country is part of that. So, it's like I have a really good boat and it's meant to float, but I have this tiny hole, but I'm just going to kind of ignore it. Well, this is the problem that we have, we are not seeing the hole in the hull of our boat, and then we wonder why we're sinking. So these are not the gaps of experience. These are the gaps of belief. We need to shore up our gaps of belief because our beliefs create our experience. It's a sunny day. Oh, what a wonderful day. Oh, it's raining today. Oh, what an awful day. Well, if you're a farmer, oh, a sunny day is creating drought and a rainy day is good for our crops. The opposite, the exact opposite. So you experience your beliefs. And that is the inertia field. Now, this is what the advanced science is teaching us. We need to understand that our beliefs come from a connection with the rest of the universe. This is the gap that we have to cross, and we are there. But we have to understand that we are not a product as we've been presented. So, when someone says, "Oh man, you are handsome," or "You are beautiful," and then you start to giggle and say, "Oh, thank you so much for the compliment." Well, so you become handsome or beautiful based on what someone said? Really? The beauty comes from within. The beauty is more than skin deep. So when you see someone that's beautiful and yet inside they're wicked, then you know that they are the fallen angels. But when you see the beauty coming from true intention, and you say, "Wow, that's an angel." Well, we're all angels. So now we're crossing the threshold of awareness. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, so you won't be playing the patent game again, I guess. And as Mr. Kesh said, we don't need patents. Once one understands it, the rest will understand it. How that process is going to take shape, I don't fully know, but I know it is taking shape. Before we go to Randy's question, thank you, Randy, for putting the question in the chat. Let's see if anyone else wants to open their mic and ask or make a comment or even take an exception to what Alex is sharing. Okay, Randy says, my mic is still acting up, so I'll type the question here. If I drink CO2 plasma water and sweat while working outside, is my body adding CO2 to the atmosphere by sweating?
Water is hydrogen and oxygen. So the answer is no. When you produce water, the opposite is protein. Protein is amino acid, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. And CO2 is one of the derivatives of the protein. But actually, I'm sorry, the opposite is true. The amino acid is a derivative of the carbon dioxide. So the carbon is the carrier and the oxygen is the connection to the Earth space. Let me restate that. The carbon is a connection to the universe. The oxygen is a connection to the Earth space. So that is what manifests as part of eventually as part of the amino acid. In the production of the amino acid, you produce water. Oil and water don't mix. So that is essential for our production. So we understand that the skin is oily. And so when the sweat comes out from the skin, it's not oily. That sweat is water. And that water is pure hydrogen and oxygen. So it's a very good question. But once you understand the plasma science and how it works, then you can understand, fundamentally, you have to understand that balance, the conservation of energy between the production of water and protein. Why can we produce water GANs and why can we produce amino acid GANs? That is why, because oil and water doesn't mix. And I'll give you a classic point, and I use this to demonstrate when I made the first cup of life and I skimmed off the amino acid off the top, and I gathered it up in a separate cup, and then I washed the GANs, and I say washed it about 5 times to get the salt out of it, right? And then I added back the amino acid. Well, what is the difference between amino acid that is in the physical state and the amino acid that is in the GAN state? Well, I got a clear picture because we say oil and water doesn't mix, so the oil would sit on the surface, right? Well, I added the amino acid back to the water and I held the vial up to the light. It was a glass vial and I could see the amino acid went all the way through the water. So wait a second. We're not talking about emulsification, okay? We're not talking about where you break down the surface tension of the water molecule and then emulsify the oil so that the two become intermixed. We were talking about the same kind of effect that you get from a sugar cube when you put it in a hot tea. You'll see the sugar dissolve into the tea, and then you can stir it up, and the sugar will be all through the blend. Well, the amino acid was all the way through the blend. And so this was a distinct difference in the way we were approaching the relationship of oil and water. So if you want, you can do a research paper on, understanding the viability of, understanding how adding the plasma GANs of amino acid back to the plasma GANs of water, if that's worth studying any further. So let me know when you finish your research. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, Randy, I hope that answered at least part of your question. Is there any follow-up you have? I know you're having trouble with the mic, so we understand that. Anyone else would like to bring up a question? I'll read another one. Oh, there's a new. Yes, it did. Thanks, Randy said. Thank you, Alex.
Well, may I add another point, please, before you go on to the next question? The vertical people draw energy from the sun. The sun gives the energy universally to the earth. So the question then becomes is, what is the difference between the cucumber and the tomato? What is the difference between the pumpkin and the watermelon? So obviously, each one is selecting a specific energy field from the sun, isn't it? So it's discriminating. It's taking what it needs and repelling, reflecting what it doesn't need. Do you agree with that point?
It makes sense, but I don't fully understand it, no.
Well, the point is that energy is being absorbed and that energy is being converted. And yet there's a difference between the tomato and the cucumber. There's a difference between the watermelon and the pumpkin. So the method is the same, but the result is different. So in other words, the manifestation of the pumpkin is an inertia field. It's an inertia product field. But that inertia product field is made the same way by two fields coming together and drawing the energy from the sun, which is unconditional. But now you've made it into a conditional manifestation. And one condition is pumpkin, one condition is watermelon, or one condition is tomato, one condition is cucumber. So the inertia field is a conditional field. And so why is that? Well, that has to do with the environment. So where else do we see a conditional field? Well, we see a conditional field with the ethnic Chinese community, or we see a difference with the ethnic English community, or with the ethnic I don't know, African community. Okay, so the conditionality is in the inertia field, not in the giving field. The giving field is unconditional, so you get to choose. You are the receiver. You get to choose what you receive. And that reception is based on your time, the time you give, the time you devote, and the attention you give to it. I'll try your next question, Mark.
Anyone else? Let's intermingle these if we can. If you'd like to open your mic or put a question in the chat. All right. It was mentioned about in the 605, it was mentioned about new energy packs appearing perhaps in the future on this planet. Will the system modify the energy pack itself, or will our structure, physicality, be modified to handle the new energy pack, which could harm our structure? In the Cup of Life 1, as you were just mentioning, we actually modified the energy pack as I understand it. We didn't kill the energy pack. We drained some of its energy that it wasn't harmful anymore. And that drained energy became food for our own structure. In the new system, or what he's talking with this, I believe it's with the One Nation Network or with the system that's being set up, do you think they'll modify the energy pack, or will they modify our physical structure to be able to handle that energy pack?
Well, let's go through the process here. The structure of the physicality is a byproduct. So what the One Nation Network is doing is actually working with the feeding structure. So let's discount the structure of the physicality in this particular question. So I think the key point of the question is, if we are to receive these new energy packs, will they be detrimental to the future of humanity on this planet? So what we find is that this planet had a welcoming environment for us, and that's why we were all born here, and we were all born here and successful and alive when we arrived. It's just that our presence here has actually deteriorated the environment to a certain extent. Since we are in a deficient state, it is a very good question to ask is, will these energy packs actually provide the supplementation that we need to overcome the degradation that we have, been preoccupied with?
You mean the system could actually detune them in a way? The way we drain the energy from...
Well, the system itself will detune automatically, because we with the One Nation Network, it will be actually supplementing. So that'll be automatic. However, these energy packs are coming, and they are of a higher energy state. So the thing that we have to rely on is the fact that we are in a welcome domain. The Earth space has welcomed us. The Earth space has provided an environment which is conducive to our survival. So the Earth space is doing this because it's continually inundated with viruses, some of which are detrimental. So the magnetosphere or the Coulomb barrier is actually a discriminator that allows certain viruses to penetrate and other viruses become reflected. It operates on the same basis as our skin, right? So our skin is basically hydrophobic. So if we have things that can, break our oily barrier or, emulsify the oil of our skin, then we can penetrate through the skin. This is one of the reasons we are so susceptible to volatile organics. We're talking about, the fumes from your gas when you do your self-serving gas pumping into your car. So, when we breathe those organic volatiles, then we become susceptible to it. But these energy packs may, in fact, be supplementing our energy to elevate us to a higher energy state. This energy state at this point in time is not visible to us and is not within our awareness. So to mention that these energy packs are coming, it implies that someone somewhere has an awareness to this and is warning us of this in a certain way. But will they be benevolent or will they be harmful? Well, the earth is our friend, and I think the earth has a great role to play in this regard. So that's what I'm going to hang my hat on. But as far as our One Nation network is concerned, the beneficial viruses will be utilized. And the way we understand viruses and the way I was taught about the viruses is the same. The viruses are an energy pack that facilitates the folding of the amino acid into protein. It is fundamental to protein creation. That is why the viruses are following the blueprint of the RNA and the protein is following the functions of the DNA. So that's verifiable information. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a question they'd like to raise? Again, it can be a very simple question, but Alex can turn it into something very exciting, or it may not be so exciting of a question. Feel
I'm
free.
not an oracle. Hello, I'm not an oracle.
It's not an
I have a question. Always. Hello, Mark. Hello, everyone.
Good day, good day.
Hello, Claudia.
What do you think, Alex, sorry, about the difference between the satellites, knowledge seekers, and the units? How they work? They are different, or
Yeah, he talked about a ground-based satellite network. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay.
I'm speaking the knowledge seeker satellites, not the satellites around the Earth.
Okay.
Well, let's put it another way. You come to a party, and the party is kind of dull. And you walk through the front door, and all of a sudden the party becomes alive. And you say, well, how did that happen? Well, the life of the party just arrived, So the point of the matter is that the emission that is coming from you in terms of your physicality is manifest through the solar physicality. We call that the aura. And the aura is a representation of our emotion. And so when that emotion becomes, shall we say, detrimental to the health of the individual, then we see the degradation. But when that aura is of a higher energy state, then we say that that person is a contributor, is the life of the party. Well, the knowledge seeker satellites are of an extremely high, powerful aura. And so the field of reference will be extended. And now this is not necessarily so, but it's the difference between the belief and the experience. And if you believe that your aura will, expand, then it will happen so. And you have to know that it exists because everybody has a cell phone, and we have to ask this question. And I'm asking this question every day of people who are completely oblivious to what's going on, is how do you transfer the energy from your finger to the cell phone to make it do something? Is your finger a magic finger? Or, are you connected to an electric circuit? But the reality is that the cell phone is wireless. You are obviously wireless. However, there is nothing that happens until you come into physical contact. So there we know that in the physical, there has to be a direct connection. But we've noticed that with, let's say, a debit or a credit card, that we can tap on those point of sale devices. And when we say tap, actually, we don't even have to tap. And I've experimented with this. There can actually be a physical gap. And even I've had it as much as, say, 1/8 of an inch from the tap machine and still got it to have a result. So that means the energy had to be somehow transferred from the chip on the debit card to the circuit board on the cash machine. So there is a transfer of energy, and that is a very, very narrow gap. So that is a physical transfer of energy. It is required for you to touch the screen in order to transfer that energy. So you are a wireless device, and the cell phone is a wireless device. So these satellite knowledge seekers are also a wireless device. However, we are talking about orders of magnitude of a higher energy state. So we are not talking about a physical connection. And you already understand that non-physical wireless connection because surely to God, you know you have someone that you love in life, and not the least of which would be your parents. And you know that you are loved by someone in your life, and again, not the least of which would be your parents. So the question then becomes is, well, that love is transmitted to you wirelessly. And you could be in Brazil or you could be in Europe, and your parents would still love you. So the distance becomes irrelevant. On that point, the knowledge seeker satellites could also have a broader influence through the belief of their ability to transmit energy at a higher energy state. At that point in time, automatically it becomes an orders of magnitude higher. The question is, how many orders of magnitude? And it's not something that we have to measure and say, okay, we'll go 5 orders of magnitude, you're in the nano state, go 9 orders of magnitude, or pico state, go 12 orders. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a connection of satellites around the world that build up a mass, a critical mass. So if one satellite is in operation, it goes around the world. But, you may not even notice it. But if 100 satellites overlap and go around the world, you'll start to feel something. And that first feeling is the awareness. And then from the awareness comes the knowledge. Then the next action is to utilize that knowledge in a practical way. And the practical way of the universe is to use the knowledge as part of the communication at an emotional level. So the emotional level is operating at many orders of magnitude higher. So the thing is, we have to understand that the words don't matter because the words are physical. So the higher orders of magnitude in the emotional state cannot see the words. It only understands the emotion. But then we understand that there's an emotion at the soul of physicality, and then there's an emotion of the soul. So the interaction of those two are actually different levels, orders of magnitude. Where do we learn this? We're in book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. So you have the antimatter, which is the highest matter state, the dark matter, which is a lower matter state, and the matter state, which is the lowest of all. And you can still retain those 3 dimensions and not be in the physical state. So you can bring all that down and manifest it into the inertia of the physical state. And so that's what we're trying to do by drawing the energy from a higher state down to a lower energy state. But it doesn't have to go step by step. It can transcend from an extremely higher energy state. So this brings together your question, and it brings together the previous question that Mark mentioned about the higher energy packs. It is entirely possible that these two will come together to allow us to elevate to an even higher level. So in other words, you want to, you're a low league professional soccer player, and you want to play like a professional. It would really be much better if you would go into a professional league, because then you could practice your professional career. So if we all get elevated to a higher level, then it'll stand to reason that we will be in a better position to elevate to the kind of necessary level where we can bring peace on earth. Claudia, as always, you ask brilliant questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I asked you because sometimes I realize in these years on Cash Foundation, in my life too, that we like do many things and you don't think so much. You only act. And this action is not make part of my matter state, I think, because it's something like you induce you to do that. And that's the beauty. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I had a very practical thing happen to me. We're trying to make some special food, and I didn't have the space for a large fridge, and we needed to have a better quality fridge. And the next day, a friend of mine called me and asked me if I would be interested in buying a fridge. I looked all over the place to see if he had a hidden camera, was, recording our conversation or something, but I bought the fridge and, the next day. So when I'm looking at the time frame gap, one day we decided we need a new fridge, and the next day someone offered us, and it ended up being a brand new fridge, or nearly new fridge, excellent condition, and very happy. So what is that? Is that a serendipity? Is that a coincidence?
Purely
Or
coincidence.
hey?
As Mr. Kesh said about Rick picking the right video, purely a coincidence.
Yeah, that's strange. So I have encountered many examples of this, and I think now that the knowledge seekers are aware of this, that they too are experiencing it, and they shouldn't be so stunned anymore and say, "Oh, that was a freak." That is not a freak. That is a given. That is normal, perfectly natural experience. And now that I have been aware of that, it has happened more and more, and these things have happened before in my life, and I just kind of discounted that, just kind of, oh well, that's kind of not interesting, just say, well, that's interesting. But now I'm seeing, oh, wait a second, I see the connection. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for that connection. And I fulfilled a wish. And it happened to be a practical application of that wish. So if we understand that, then we should have confidence with that. Which actually leads me into one more point, if I may, please indulge me. And that is the fact that if the universal community is kind of tired of waiting for us, or displaying a kind of fatigue, waiting for us to kind of wakey, uh, that problem has actually come from our understanding that we are an inferior race. And as such, that means that we have less knowledge. So if you want more knowledge, you're going to, defer to a teacher, someone who has more knowledge. Well, who decides that that particular teacher has more knowledge? It's purely subjective. You say, oh, he's got a lot of knowledge. Really? Where did I get this knowledge from? I worked at it. Where did the other guy get it from? He worked at it. Where do professors get their knowledge? They work at it. But many of us restrict our knowledge to what we learn in school. Well, I can tell you that school began for me the day I left school. Because what I know now is just unbelievable compared to what I knew when I left school when I was a young man. In fact, I will go so far as to say that I was a graduate of really backward teaching. And it's not a condemnation. It's just a awareness to understand that for what I was trained for, which is to be a functional person within society, was not really what I was interested in. And to think that in 2018, I got an opportunity to teach at the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. That was unbelievable to me, because if you'd have told me that 30 or 40 years ago, I would not have believed you. I would not have believed that that was even possible. And yet, here I am today, and I'm very happy about it, and I'm very honored to be part of that whole process. But the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that many of these questions I have had all my life. And I thought, when will I get the answer? Well, the answer is forthcoming each and every day, because now we have an awareness of how things are coming. And to your question, if these energy packs are coming, and if the Earth space allows them to penetrate, they will definitely contribute to our well-being. But our knowledge will elevate by orders of magnitude, and it'll make everything much easier. Because those who are unwilling and afraid will not be able to, shall we say, exert their control at these higher levels as effectively as they are now. So the only reason they are effective is because, as the man says, nothing anyone says or does can affect you unless you allow it. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to present, and I hope you've enjoyed these series. And Mark, thank you so much for leading the pack. And
Alex,
hello, yes.
before you run away, I just wanted to clarify, with regards to the satellite souls, I kind of feel that they are movers and transitioners and helpers of not just spreading knowledge, but movement of souls, kind of guiding them and making sure that they don't get lost or, you know, in the wrong direction, kind of thing. Is that part of it? Like moving knowledge?
Gail, that's a terrific point, because on face value, you're 100% correct. However, my own personal experience as a teacher, I have gained an enormous amount of benefit, and I think I would rival that compared to the benefit that you get from attending these classes. And it's only because I'm in the teacher position. So you know, before I have to teach something that I understand. I can't teach if I don't want to teach something that I don't believe in, and I don't want to teach something that would be misleading. So I have to understand it. So that helps me. So that becomes a very selfish thing, you see. So I think that these satellite souls are seeking the same kind of selfish satisfaction. But you cannot be self-serving without doing it on behalf of someone else.
Exactly.
First, you have to give, and then you can receive. So therefore, to manifest the benefit of being soul satellites, they have to have a genuine intention of giving to the other souls.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, 100%. And
okay, so you're 100%, my 100%, that's 200%.
I think, to me, I'm trying to think of a way of expressing. In this case, the soul will decide or will be aware the help is needed. And, you know, they would be almost like an automatic thing. But when you say it's self-serving, I mean, if we're all connected, then and the role that they play is well, not only a peaceful one, but a helpful one. I mean, they have to take advantage of it. They will be forced to take advantage of it because they're part of the whole. So, yeah, and what a wonderful way to bring peace. And one last thing, I keep wondering or getting mixed up here. The soul of physicality, is it the one that has the power of 18 Hiroshima bombs, or is it soul of the man? Because soul of the man, that's not enough. Has to be much more than that, doesn't it?
I think it's the soul of physicality. That's my opinion.
That's
Because
fine.
you're looking at a quantity less than the universe. You understand? So the soul of the physicality is at a lower energy state than the soul.
Yes.
So the answer would be yes.
So that's what gets like a bullet going to the soul of the man when there's when this when the body is finished and it's passing. So that's the huge boost. But then if we have 1,000, we end up with 200 unless we can do the right thing and replenish ourselves.
Well, the one point that you mentioned was, about the soul wanting to, elevate. I forget how you phrased it, but it was perfect. The thing is, the soul doesn't need to do that. The soul already knows that. It's the soul of physicality that's having the problem because we are feedback dominant. So that dominance comes from the physicality instead of, being feeding dominant and saying, well, what exactly is it that's feeding me? And so if we say that the energy from the universe is unconditional, is what's feeding us, then we become catalytic, just like the sun. So then we become a little sun as well. And in that process, we can maintain the energy balance between the soul and the soul of physicality and its manifestation. And that manifestation may be in the plasma state or may be in the physical state. But that manifestation is maintained. And so this capability then needs to be practiced and added to our toolkit so that we become more skillful.
Become more versatile? I didn't hear the last.
Oh yeah, we become more skillful. Yeah, of course. Through the upgrade of our skill set, we become more versatile, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alex, for insights. I still have to not dig, but kind of put things together to, on an ongoing basis. Just keep on keeping on. And thank you very much.
Well, Gail, if I may, first of all, you have an enormous amount of knowledge, and I think you should lean on that more. And it's important to be humble because you don't want to be a controller or a ruler, in that regard. You don't want to be a dominator. But it is important for you to have confidence in your ability. And, the same confidence that you have when you go to sleep at night and you can fall asleep and allow your soul to travel. If we can all get that confidence in our awakened state, then we can. This is why we have to grasp at these little straws and say, "Oh well, I needed a fridge, and the next day I got a fridge." Well, that is I mean, like seriously, if you were a gambler, so well, you make a wish today, and what are the odds you're going to get it tomorrow, and place your bets. So I think that is a very low probability. But this has happened now more and more frequently for me. So is it that it's happening more frequently, or am I now aware that it's happening? Am I, tuning into that, saying, "Oh, I see the connection now," and so that's the difference between knowing and having knowledge.
Now you know it's going to happen.
Well, I'm having more and more confidence. Unlike you, we're still shortchanging ourselves on the confidence side. But
yeah, I did the same thing with a car. We needed a car badly when I first came to South Africa. And I kept saying, no, that's not the right one. No, that's not the right one. And people were getting very frustrated. Then all of a sudden, there was the car. It was like 12 years old, but that car was the best car ever. And, I just I knew in my heart that the right car would come along. So it did. And when you have faith and confidence, as you say, things do happen. Thank you.
you brought up a real trick. I really would like to just take another moment to expand on that. That's a really, really good example, Gail.
Yes.
There was a story that there was a wish, and there was a wish to have a new car. And there was a question, did you have any other wish? And he says, well, what kind of car did you want? He says, well, I don't care what kind of car. I just make sure I didn't want a green car. So
Oh, yes.
so then surprise, surprise, the person arrived at that location, and there was a car to pick him up. And he said, this is your car. And he says, oh, well, thank you very, very much. My wish came true. I got a car. But it was green.
Ah,
And I said, well, why was the car green? Well, because you said, as long as it's not green, I would be happy. Well, in the universe, not doesn't work.
exactly. Yes.
So when you tell your child, don't do that, and your child says, oh, yeah, what do you know? Or I'll wait till you go around the corner and then I'll do that. Because they don't hear the word not. They only hear do that, you see? And that is the positive communication of the soul. So we seem to have introduced a so-called negative thing, and we see that in heat exchange. Why? Because we provide heat or we provide cold. But the truth is, cold is the absence of heat. So you're either providing heat or removing heat. It is impossible to provide cold. You see what I'm saying? So not doesn't work.
Yeah.
So only
Def-
the giving and the taking works.
mm. Yeah, we have to learn to communicate properly.
Is that correct?
Thank you again, Alex.
Oh, thank you all the panelists on this panel, because we are all essential for bringing peace on this planet. So thank you all.